think it is obvious that the government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could engage in supporting criminal activity against Canadians here on Canadian soil, whether it be murders or extortion or other violent acts. It is absolutely unacceptable.
When these acts of violence happen, if someone's shooting, if an organized member of crime is being hired or being engaged by a diplomat, which just sounds just incredibly disturbing, if that's happening, that threatens everyone that lives in that community, everyone that lives in that neighborhood.
Where do Canada and India relations go now? The feds this week expelled 6 diplomats, including India's top officer in Ottawa, the High Commissioner, after the RCMP alleged the involvement of Indian government agents in violent crimes here in Canada, including extortion and homicides. So what happens now for relations with a country that is still, for all intensive purposes, considered an ally of sorts, at least? Let's bring back the front bench to talk about that. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Rob, I'll start with you. This is such a unique situation in that we would normally be talking about expelling allies when it comes to our clear adversaries like Iran or Russia or China, for example, even. This is a country that strategically the U.S. and other allies are trying to grow their relationship with.
Yeah, I mean, India is one of our largest trading partners. We want it to be an even greater trading partner. It's the world's largest democracy. And it's also politically very important to Prime Minister Trudeau, to Pierre Poilievre, to Jagmeet Singh. 1 in 25 Canadians is of Indian heritage. And 1 in 50 Canadians is of Sikh heritage. So I think it's very interesting, the diaspora politics at play here. But this is, to what the Prime Minister said yesterday, a really, really serious situation. It's a huge story in the United States. It's a huge story in the United Kingdom. Interestingly enough, though, I was reading the Times of India and the Hindustan Times today. It's not playing quite the same in India as it is in the U.S., the U.K., and especially here in Canada. And I think this is one of these situations where I don't think Trudeau is doing this for his own political purposes. I think this is something that any leader would have to do. It's a holiday Monday. The RCMP is making this announcement. The Prime Minister has to speak to it. I think it was good that Pierre Poilievre had a briefing on this and that Jagmeet Singh had a briefing on this, because this is one of these things. It's not about partisan politics. This is about Canada's sovereignty and about Canadian citizens being targeted by a foreign government, an ally in Canada. It's ridiculous and it's just a scary situation.
Tom, Rob mentioned some of the reaction elsewhere. I should say that India has very specifically said that the allegations aren't true and refuted them. In the U.S. in particular, we heard from the State Department today saying that they had hoped India would cooperate, but they've chosen a different path. How key do you think the U.S. reaction will be going forward in trying to, in Canada, trying to navigate this?
On your first point about India saying that they had, that it's not true, what I read was that they were actually saying they haven't seen any evidence. But we're also told that when they met in Singapore, they refused to look at the evidence. And saying you haven't seen the evidence is not quite the same thing as saying it ain't true. They're not saying it ain't true. And I think that's a key factor for Canada. We do have enough information. It's very hard for them to give a blanket denial. With regard to the United States, I note in particular, Vassy, a huge difference in tone between the way the Americans have handled this. They have credible, serious information about Indian government involvement in an attempt to assassinate an American on American soil, the same way we had an actual assassination here in Canada, and we've been reacting to it for over a year. But I also think that Mr. Trudeau has been playing this very strongly. He opened Parliament with it. We talked about this a bit before, 13 months ago. He's back with it on a weekend. I know how important it is to protect Canadians. It is the top priority of any government. But I also don't believe for one second that this is a huge coincidence, that he's taking this on the weekend after the information broke with regard to dozens of his members perhaps signing a document asking for a leadership review. I don't think it's an accident, because when he got questions on that, he got to say, I'm talking about things that are far more important than these internal politics of a party. I also think that Mr. Trudeau has his keen eye and his experienced eye on a very important community. Rob just gave the indications of the size of it. You've got nearly 1 million Canadians who are of Sikh origin, and they're going to be very thankful for Mr. Trudeau for standing up. And it is one of those communities that have been moving over strongly towards the Conservatives. This sort of strong stand might convince some of them to stay with the Liberals if that were to be the case. So there is politics involved in this. And yes, it's a serious issue. I'm not saying it's not. But I also don't think we should be naive enough to believe that there's no involved in this. There is.
Yeah, the only sort of caveat I would add is that the Indian government did issue as a statement in which they denied that the agents of the government were culpable in the specifics that the RCMP were alleging. That's what essentially I was referencing. Lisa, your thoughts on where things go from here, and then maybe I'll get both you and Brian to weigh in on the timing of it.
Well, there's going to be a lot of fallout, first of all, and we may not understand today exactly how far the fallout is going to be. What I take away from this is, quite frankly, that Canada's reputation on the world stage is one of weakness. India is not playing with us the same way that they play ball with the United States, quite frankly, and they don't fear any kind of words from this government in terms of tarnishing their reputation or impeding any of their trade deals or their relationship with the United States, which is incredibly important to them. The Biden administration has fostered a closer relationship with Modi's government. They're part of the Quad. They're looked upon as the place to pivot to in case China doesn't work out, or to buttress against China. So they're really an important world player, and we're kind of just getting flicked away as an annoying kind of gnat that's sitting on your sleeve, which is unfortunate for Canada, and we're going to have to come to terms with that and deal with it. Where the chickens come home to roost is here. It was pointed out the number of people in the diaspora. If India decides that they're going to play hardball with us and to teach Canada a lesson because we really don't matter in terms of trade, they can easily withdraw the ability for people to get visitors visas. They can definitely stop international students from coming to our country. They've threatened that in the past. And if there's anything that I heard today from my friends who are Indian not by birth, but by heritage, that's what they're worried about, being able to get back home and visit with a sick relative. It's not about sanctions. It's not about trade. It is about the lentils, of course, but it is about these family connections that can be taken away from Canadian voters very quickly as a result of the way in which the government is dealing with this in a very public manner.
And I totally understand that and that worry. I would just also say, though, that it was the RCMP, Brian, who first came out yesterday. Like, I think I get the criticism of the government at times, but, like, the RCMP came out with very specific allegations that are pretty serious. Like, I don't know how you ignore that.
Absolutely. And if ever you were seen to be going sort of mildly on this, I think you'd be criticized immensely for that, and probably rightfully so. So I agree with the preamble. And I'll add on timing. I'm hesitant to sort of apply what I'm about to say to this specific situation because I don't know the dynamic between the RCMP and the government. I just haven't lived that, so I can't speak to any experience when it comes to that. But I can tell you, having been in a premier's office, there's no question that you will receive a bunch of things that are ready to be announced, things that are going to be made public, things that are going to come out from government and sometimes from entities, from some of the agencies, things of that nature. And when you have the ability to say, let's try to schedule it so the premier's there or the prime minister's there in this case, or a minister will take that. And, oh, well, we're not in town for that. And, oh, that's on message for that day because we'll be doing something else. Those are all considerations. So the point that I'm getting at is I do think, not sure it's specific to this because, again, I don't know the dynamic between the RCMP doing their thing and the government doing its thing. But it is normal for a prime minister's office to receive, look, there's a bunch of announcements that are about to happen in October. There's a bunch of things that we have to announce. Here's the schedule of the prime minister, the ministers involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not, I think, uncommon for someone to say, hey, look, we did have a bit of an issue politically. This has to be announced in the next few days, maybe a few weeks. Why don't we bump it up and get the channel changed? I don't know if that's happened here. I definitely take Tom's point that sort of twice now that this issue has come up when there were some political considerations for the Liberals, and maybe that is possible, but I think it has nothing to do with the substance, but simply, I would argue, potentially it would have a little bit on the timing and only on the edges of let's not do it next week, let's do it this week, or if we have to do it this week, let's do it today or instead of tomorrow.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the discussion. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie.